Hi, I'm Adrian Benepe, President and CEO of Brooklyn Botanic Garden. I grew up in New York City. The parks were my backyard, and then was lucky enough to stumble into working in parks first as a teenager, then right out of college as a park ranger, and then worked my way up through the Parks Department, eventually becoming New York City Parks Commissioner for 11 years under Mayor Bloomberg. Also, I worked at the Trust for Public Land, a national parks organization, for 8 years before coming here to be CEO of Brooklyn Botanic Garden. So my entire career has been spent working in service of restoring and improving public parks here in New York City and across the country. Brooklyn Botanic Garden, which was designed by Olmsted Brothers firm in 1910, it really is a great example of a public space in a really densely populated inner city area. When it was created, of course, Brooklyn was not densely populated, but has become so, now home to 2.5 million people. And Brooklyn Botanic Garden is a oasis of serenity and beauty for 1 million visitors a year, most of them from Brooklyn. So this is really a great community asset and really speaks to sort of the height of the Olmsted brothers' design powers. As with a lot of things in New York City, the museums, the performing arts centers, the zoos, sad to say, Brooklyn Botanic Garden was shut down for almost 5 months by the pandemic. In hindsight, possibly, we could have made the case for staying open, but the city shut down all of the cultural institutions, including the outdoor spaces, such as this one. That was a major impact. We lost all of our visitation revenue, all of our event revenue, and ended up in a very dire financial circumstance, which continues to this day. Luckily, we've been able to build back up a membership, and more luckily, we were able to reopen to the public by late July and early August of 2020. So we've been open almost a year now since the pandemic started. And it's just reinforced exactly how much people really needed big outdoor spaces in which to recreate. We understood very early on in the pandemic, because the epidemiologists told us this, that this virus really doesn't transmit outdoors, and that the only thing we had to do in New York City, the only thing left to do, all the gyms are closed, the bars, the restaurants, the health clubs, the theaters, everything was closed. The thing we got to do was to go to parks. And thank goodness they didn't close the parks. We got to go to the parks for our physical and mental restoration. Unfortunately, the botanical gardens were closed, but they were reopened fairly quickly. And we understood how vital it was for us to be able to nurture our physical, emotional, and mental health outdoors in big spaces, many of them created or designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux, or by the Olmsted Brothers firm. Of course, we had to change everything during the pandemic in terms of our operations. At first, we required, and for the better part of the year, everyone to be masked, even outdoors. We had limited attendance. We sold time tickets. You couldn't just show up. So it changed everything. Gradually, that's been modified. We no longer require visitors to wear masks outdoors. Soon, we hope to allow our employees not to wear masks outdoors. And we'll see if we maintain time tickets. So a lot changed, but things are also gradually changing back. The best thing that's changing back is our visitation numbers are back up, and our membership, which went way down, is back up to normal areas. Growing up in New York City, I didn't have a backyard. The parks were my backyard. Also, my father is a landscape architect and city planner and used to take us for walks in parks, and I got to really appreciate parks that way. And then one of my first teenage jobs was working for the Parks Department. All of the great events of my life have taken place in parks, and it was almost natural, even though I was not trained as a landscape architect or in any kind of forest science, that when I got out of college, I kind of accidentally drifted into, I thought I was going to be a journalist, but I drifted into working for the Parks Department, and that began a long and really interesting career in parks and outdoor spaces. I have so many favorite Olmsted Park memories because there are 8 Olmsted landscapes in New York City, and I have great memories in all of them. Really my favorite memories are of just noodling around in Riverside Park and Central Park principally with my kids when they were little, and that you had these landscapes with rocks and trees and hills and grass. You could just wander around picking up sticks and seeds and looking at wildlife. So some of my very, very favorite memories are just noodling around in the great Olmsted Parks of New York with my kids. Also, my wife and I got married in Central Park in the North End in a beautiful, very rustic area. So lots of good memories sort of indelibly associated with the romantic landscapes of New York, courtesy of Olmsted and Vaux and the Olmsted Brothers firm. When I talk to people about Brooklyn Botanic Garden, they're also in some ways as surprised as I was to learn that Brooklyn Botanic Garden is the product of the Olmsted Brothers firm. There are so many things about Olmsted landscapes that are really great surprises to this day. Here at Brooklyn Botanic Garden, for example, the fact that it's designed by the Olmsted Brothers firm. Very few people know that. But largely speaking, if you look at parks like Central Park and Prospect Park, they're full of water bodies and waterfalls that for all the world look natural. And when I tell people that no, there's a big faucet that you turn on and water from the city reservoirs, clean water, drinking water, comes out of these waterfalls and streams and into these artificial lakes. And the way I help them to understand it is that I say, think about this as a Disneyland built in the 19th century before there were machines. But they used water technology, going back to ancient Rome, to allow water to create this artifice, this fake landscape with real trees, real plants, real water, but engineered, highly engineered, to create this artifice, this semblance of the countryside, the Adirondacks, the Catskills, the rolling English countryside. So I've always tried to explain to people that Olmsted landscapes are sort of Disneylands of the 19th century, very elevated, very edifying, very democratic, but still artificial. The great tradition of American public parks was born here in New York City with the creation of Central Park and then the other parks thereafter. That set the tone that these parks are for everyone. They're for rich or poor, different races, different religions. That was spelled out by Olmsted and Vaux in their philosophies. That's still the case here in New York City parks. They're still very democratic spaces. And that's the case here at Brooklyn Botanic Garden. It's very much of the neighborhood and for the neighborhood. Our audience is extremely diverse. We have 19,000 household memberships, people who have signed up to become members here. We have free tickets for all of our time tickets. We have events here to promote music and art from the community. So we're very definitely working in the Olmsted tradition of public spaces for all. Olmsted was very learned in the whole idea of public health. He had been the sanitary commissioner during the Civil War, trying to create healthful conditions for the Union Army. So he had a great understanding of science and public health, and he viewed parks as places to promote public health. The expression lungs of the city was first used by Olmsted and Vaux in describing the impact of having a big treed area in the middle of a busy, smoky, dirty city. He understood the importance of parks for the public health of poor people living crowded in tenement housing. And that was really brought home recently during the pandemic. And Olmsted would have said, of course, I understood this. There were pandemics in the 19th century, diphtheria and yellow fever and all kinds of terrible things that would kill hundreds, thousands, and sometimes tens of thousands of New Yorkers. And he just innately understood the healthful properties of open spaces and clean air that's promoted by these parks. So we saw that in the recent pandemic. The only place we could go were the public parks, which were allowed to be kept open, thank goodness. We also understood there's a lack of equity of access, that large portions of New York City do not have access to large parks nearby, like all of central Brooklyn and a lot of the South Bronx. We understand the need to have large landscapes for people to be able to socially distance and yet be outdoors together. And places like the Botanic Garden, which unfortunately were closed at the height of the pandemic, we now understand that the next time this happens, places like this should not be closed. They're more important than ever. The parks were never more important than they were over the last year during the pandemic, and that should be extended to botanical gardens and zoos and other outdoor institutions. Thinking about Olmsted's birth having been 200 years ago next year, it's remarkable how well his works have stood up. Even though we have attempted to change them in ways that were really inappropriate. The 20th century saw the advent of permanent recreational facilities, ball fields and skating rinks, and in many cases when those were put in, it was kind of a mistake. They put them in the wrong places. And when we didn't understand the Olmsted landscapes, we made big mistakes, and some park systems were destroyed by driving highways through them, the worst possible thing you could do to a park. These great landscapes with large open spaces that are flexible use that can be used for a variety of things, we now understand how skillful and thoughtful that design was, and that we need to respect and understand that legacy and build more parks with flexible outdoor spaces to use that sort of Olmstedian vernacular. And we have now landscape architects like Michael van Valkenburg who understand the need for both flexible open spaces and for beauty. Let's not ever underestimate the importance of natural beauty, particularly in crowded cities.